Hello, YouTube. I'm going to be presenting an argument that I've recently developed in favor of um, the existence of abstract objects, or in other words, I'm going to be showing that Platonism is true. So, the motivation for this argument is it's really like two thought experiments. It's this thought experiment, which is like the statue of the statue and the clay puzzle, and then there's the ship of Theseus thought experiment. But for today's video, we're just gonna focus on the statue and the clay puzzle. All right, now the argument. I've already written the argument, but I'm just going to explain in my own words. Hopefully, I could motivate the account for abstract objects existing doing so, right? So basically, the idea is that like there's this the statue and the clay puzzle is that like there's a statue and a clay puzzle is basically the idea that there's this statue called David, and the clay in which it is constituted of is called lump. And the idea is that it would seem that David and lump are one and the same object, right? It would seem as though the lump, the clay, is what makes David David. But in actuality, they aren't the same object. They're not identical. They both have different properties, right? Well, not both of them, but like they don't share all the same properties. So, for example, if you flatten a statue, David will be destroyed, but lump will survive. So we can say that, well, David, the lump has a different property than David. We could say that David cannot survive being flattened. Lump can survive being flattened. Therefore, David and lump has different properties. If X and Y has different properties, then X and Y are not identical. This is a basic principle in philosophy called indiscernibility of identicals. Almost everyone accepts it. Like if you do not accept this principle, then it could lead to contradictions. So premise 5 is just the indiscernibles of identicals. The conclusion is just David and lump aren't identical to each other, right? So we know that David and lump aren't identical to each other, but this has severe consequences because, well, if they aren't identical to each other, well, what is the difference? I mean, it would seem as though David occupies the same space as lump. I mean, like lump is literally what constitutes David. They occupy the same space at the same time. They have the same material composition. Like obviously, David and the lump are just clay. So what is the difference? I mean, it would seem so far as the difference would have to be non-spatial. Like you could see the statue right here. Like it would seem that you cannot deny that the David and the clay that constitutes David has the same. They occupy the same space, right? Because the clay is literally just what David is. So, so far it would seem as though the difference between them has to be non-spatial. And since they occupy the same space at the same time, the difference would be non-temporal. Since they have the same material composition, it would be non-physical. And most importantly, this difference doesn't really seem to be based on my mind, right? Like it seems to be an objective difference. It seems as though even if there were no minds, like it would still be the case that if you flatten David, then if you flatten the statue, then David would be destroyed, but lump will still exist. This seems like an objective fact. It doesn't seem to be based on any minds, right? It would be an objective property of reality. And since it's non-spatial, non-temporal, and non-physical, it would have to be non-causal. So the consequence of this statue and the clay puzzle, it seems to lead to the conclusion that there are abstract objects, at least abstract objects and abstract objects about properties. Maybe not numbers, maybe not math, maybe not propositions, but at least there has to be abstract objects about properties. And yeah, so this difference has to be non-spatial, non-mental, non-physical, non-temporal, and non-causal, which is the textbook definition of an abstract object. Yes.